When you look in the developing world, you would assume that sort of their increase of cancer rates would sort of happen the same way it did in places like America. But when you actually look, as soon as they get like actual mattress beds, they spike up to where sort of American cancer rates are right now, which is sort of telling me once you have, fabrics that are covered in flame retardant, then cancer spikes.
The startup investment landscape is changing, and world-class companies are being built outside of Silicon Valley. We find them, talk with them, and discuss the upside of investing in them. Welcome to Upside.
Woo!
Hello, and welcome to the Upside Podcast, the first podcast finding upside outside of Silicon Valley. I'm Jay Klaus, and I'm accompanied by my co-host, Mr. Close the Rings himself, Eric Hornung.
Jay, we have been here at CES for what feels like 14 years, and we have walked what feels like 1,400 miles per day.
I have become so old here.
Yeah, you have a beard.
A neck beard's coming, too.
Yeah, so we decided that, the shuttles aren't worth it. It's not worth waiting in that line to stand on a crowded bus, to stop in traffic, and Ubers and Lyfts are too expensive for a young podcast on a bootstrap budget. So we decided to huff it just about everywhere at CES, meaning that we're averaging over 11 miles a day, and I am on fire with my ring challenge.
Is it really 11 miles? How many steps are in a mile?
2,000.
Wow. That is wild. Yeah, we're walking close to 2 miles from the hotel to the convention center.
And then when you're at the convention center, you're walking a mile and a half, 2 miles, just walking around.
You're right. I forget how big this place is. It's like mini cities inside of each of these venues, these hotels, everything.
There are legitimate full cities in the United States that don't have as many people in them as are in this one hall at CES.
But you've inspired me to start paying attention to my Apple Health app, which apparently I set up at one point, didn't realize, so I'm tracking my steps now, which is good. I used to have a Fitbit, Eric, but I didn't like wearing both a Fitbit and a watch. It seemed like I was wearing two watches, and I felt like a square.
Are you going to get a Apple Watch now?
No, because I like the look and the diversity in regular watches.
You could wear regular watches when you go out, and Apple Watches on your, business day-to-day.
That's true. We met somebody earlier this week that actually had a regular watch, and on the bottom of the watch band, his Apple Watch. So he is literally wearing two watches on one band on his wrist, which is a very interesting solution to this that he pulled off very well, but he's also very well dressed, and I don't know that I could pull it off.
Right. You wanted to wear tie-dye out and about on the town, so maybe that's not your look.
That shirt was a gift.
I'm sure it's a great gift. It's just, maybe not the right place is the top of the strat.
Well, speaking of health tech, today we are talking with Elizabeth Galbut, the founding partner of SoGal Ventures. Elizabeth Galbut is a venture capitalist, designer, professor, and global speaker on healthcare innovation. She's a managing partner of SoGal Ventures, which invests in diverse founding teams in the U.S. and in Asia. With over 60 investments to date, she is actively seeking to back exceptional startups, revolutionizing how the next generation lives, works, and stays healthy. Elizabeth was recently honored as a Forbes 30 Under 30 in venture capital, and was mentioned on stage at the first kickoff keynote at CES as an investment that CTA made into different venture capital teams, including our friends at Harlem Capital.
Yeah, SoGal is one of those funds that I don't know almost anything about, except for the fact that I see them on Twitter all the time, and not from them, but from other people talking about them. That's usually a good indication of there's something special here.
Love that. Love that. I'm excited to dive into this. It seems like Elizabeth spends her time investing in frontier technology that is a little bit outside of what you may see most venture capitalists putting time and money into studying. It seems like she might be putting an emphasis on some true improvements in the quality of life and wellness space. If you guys have any thoughts as we go through this interview with Elizabeth, you can tweet at us at UpsideFM or email us hello@upside.fm, and we'll get to that interview right after this.
Jay, this summer we had some fantastic interns, but we were spoiled because we didn't have to do as much work. So if we wanted to hire someone, I don't even know what we would do.
It would be really hard to find the quality of interns who really just came to us this summer. I'm already thinking, how are we going to find interns like this again? If we ever want to hire a full-time employee, Eric, how are we going to find somebody that high quality?
There's probably nothing out there, to be honest.
I think you're wrong, because our friends at Integrity Power Search can help hire the best talent for your startup. They are the #1 full-stack, high-growth startup recruiting firm between the coasts, partnering with venture capitalists, private equity groups, and CEOs to build amazing teams.
That's right. Since 2012, they've successfully executed over 600 searches, and they're on track for 200 in 2019. Their clients have collectively raised over $2.5 billion with a B in venture funding, and that's still going. Still counting, Jay. They're experts in all types of areas, including SaaS, autonomous vehicles, artificial intelligence, big data, you name it, they're there if it's between the coasts.
Basically, if you're hiring, Integrity Power Search is your go-to. They are the plug, Eric, and so here's the plug for them. Go to upside.fm/integrity and learn more about how Integrity Power Search can help you with your hiring needs. Elizabeth, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Jay and Eric.
On Upside, we like to start with a background on the guest. So can you tell us about the history of Elizabeth?
Of course. So I'm Elizabeth Galbut. I'm one of the founding partners of SoGal Ventures, as well as the co-president of the SoGal Foundation. We're on a mission to redefine the next generation of diverse founders and funders around the world. And we do that on the venture capital side by investing in amazing, diverse founding teams that are revolutionizing how the next generations will live, work, and stay healthy. So think consumer tech, enterprise software, as well as health tech. And we invest in companies all over the world. I know your podcast focuses on underrepresented regions, and that's actually a big part of our investment thesis because we believe great companies can be built anywhere.
Why did you decide that you wanted to ladder into ways that we live, work, and stay healthy when you're starting this fund?
Yeah, so we're really looking at things that impact the lives of millennials and Generation Z. So when you just look at the statistics in the venture capital world, about 96% of venture capitalists are white men, traditionally sort of older generations. When we first started this, we were 24 and 26. And so we were, right, like millennials ourselves and also friends with a lot of people in Generation Z and really looking at all the missed opportunities that traditional venture capitalists were passing over because they simply didn't understand, what was really coming up the pipeline and how this would so deeply impact all of our lives.
Are there any examples that come to mind as to like a company that was doing really well but kept getting passed over because people just didn't get it?
Yeah, so there's a company right now in our portfolio who, she is a complete beast in fundraising and sort of like resilience, but definitely had a tough time at the beginning and middle. So the CEO is Polly Rodriguez, and she has a company called Unbound.
Polly was my concierge when I used Grouper.
Wow.
Is that serious?
Well, because I was a Grouper power user, sadly. And Polly was my concierge, so I had followed her on Twitter or something, and I saw when she started this company.
Yeah, so Unbound's a company for female sexual health and wellness. And it's actually when you look at sort of comparing the market of say something like condoms or the market of, erectile dysfunction drugs, which, right, have raised money at billions of dollars, like Hims or Roman, right? Female sexual health and wellness barely gets any funding compared to that. And a lot of investors pass this over, even though the size of the market is multiple times larger, and it's a really underserved market. So, of course, when you're pitching, right, to 96% older white men about female sexual health and wellness, that can turn into, some really awkward conversations where they just completely don't understand where you're coming from or make inappropriate comments or don't take you seriously, right? And that's really challenging for any sort of founders in, right, the Sextech female sexual health space. So that's one thing where it's as, right, female millennial women, we connected to Polly, we followed her for a little bit, and then after one pitch meeting, it was yes, this is it, right? She's faced so many other challenges, female sexual health and wellness is not allowed to advertise on Pinterest, Facebook, Instagram, the subway system in New York, even though, male erectile dysfunction
really
is. They can't use Stripe. They can't, use QuickBooks. They get
What?
off from all payment providers. Like the amount of obstacles her and other Sextech founders have had to face is absolutely insane. But these amazing female founders just like, they persist no matter what. And finally, they're able, after multiple years of sort of fighting like Facebook to be able to do some advertisements, they're able to advertise a few products, not all products. But it's just like blatant biased and double standards that, you know, male sexual health and wellness is considered reproductive needs and therefore a healthcare need, where female sexual health and wellness is considered pleasure and therefore not necessary.
Wow.
When actually it's really quite the opposite.
Quite the opposite, I would expect.
Yeah.
Wow. So, I mean, raising a fund, I'm sure you encountered the same struggles.
Of course.
So how did that go? How did you guys raise a fund at the age that you did with this thesis?
Yeah, it was really hard. So we spent almost 3 years raising this fund, and we have over 90 LPs now. It probably took over 2,000 or 3,000 meetings. And, you know, lots of signed documents and reassurances that we were getting money that then didn't come to fruition, just like it happens with startups too, right? Nothing's real until the money's in the bank. But we started investing after we did our first close, and we've now invested in 24 companies. And what's really amazing is just in the time that we've been fundraising for the fund while also investing, many of our portfolio companies have already gone from pre-seed to seed to Series A to Series B. And actually some of the founders got to take money off the table at like a Series A and Series B and then ended up investing in our fund because we still were fundraising for our fund. So that's been kind of funny to see just how quickly fundraising moves sort of on the founder side versus for a venture fund, because you really don't have a product or some technology that you're trying to sell. So people get a lot less excited and it seems way more risky because they're basically saying, hey, like 25 and 27-year-old, why should we trust you with our hard-earned money to basically be like, a financial fiduciary for their money and an investment manager versus, somebody who's very visionary and building, the next big technology.
What time frame are we talking about here? When did you guys start raising and when did you close?
Yeah, so we had our first close in January of 2017 and we just finished fundraising.
That's crazy. Where are some of these other bias gaps that pop up? We talked about female sexual health, but what else is kind of out there as like, obviously this is a need, but no one's thinking about it because they have a bias?
Yeah, so I know we wanted to talk a lot about health and health tech today. And when you think about sort of health, especially with females, there's so many areas of opportunities and areas of bias. So just traditionally in history, like most pharmaceutical drugs have only been tested on men. So when you think about dosages for pharmaceutical drugs, these are all done on tests to get, FDA approval on men. And there's not a ton of research on is this appropriate dosage for women? Do women's bodies react differently to medication than male bodies? And this also happens across different, racial profiles. So do Asians respond differently to a drug than a Caucasian? Because traditionally everything was done on white men. And part of that was because they didn't want to put women who could potentially be pregnant, in a clinical drug trial. But this has gone on for decades. And so now we have all these drugs and pharmaceutical things that are being administered to everyone, but have only really been tested on a certain category of individuals. So that's one major opportunity. There's so much going into AI drug development. So I am an investor in a company called In Silico Medicine that looks a lot at aging and different compounds and sort of using AI to speed up the drug development process, and including women and minorities in that conversation is huge, because I personally, and for the greater good of society, really want, that medicines be working for people versus against them, just because, we haven't done the work on the ground. So that's one big area for opportunity. The other is when you sort of look, research has shown that women's concerns aren't taken seriously by doctors. So oftentimes women will go into doctors, multiple specialists, maybe even the same type of specialist, but multiple different ones, because they're not sort of getting the attention they need. Very common, the story is you'll go in with all these complaints and they'll be like, you're just getting older. Maybe exercise a little bit more. and, eat a little bit better. But some of these women are in serious pain or have serious chronic conditions, but research has shown that they're actually not taken seriously in healthcare. So there's a trend on sort of how do you then empower not just women, but everyone to be a consumer of their own healthcare, so that if they are having those really frustrating experiences where they know there's something going on in their body, but nobody's helping them, that they can actually get the answers they need. So we're an investor in a company called Everlywell. It's based in Austin, Texas. It's an absolutely incredible company. In their second year, they did $50 million of revenue. They've partnered with major insurance companies like Humana. They're in all Targets, all CVS's, and it's absolutely incredible because it provides price transparency. So especially millennials and Generation Z, health insurance is really confusing, right? You're at your first job, you don't want to miss work, you already miss work to go to the doctor, and then you're like, well, I have a $5,000 deductible. How much is this going to cost just to get these tests that I need? And so often millennials or Generation Z will get the order for the test, but they actually will never go to the lab and get that, both for time and money perspective, because there's no transparency, right? You get your lab bill in the mail and you're like, oh my gosh, $2,432? What? I can't pay for this, right? And then we're all worried about medical debt and how that's going to affect our credit, and if we want to buy a house or even get a credit card, right? There's all these implications, so it creates this fear of I can't even go get the lab test I need, right? And that's terrible. So Everlywell creates really affordable, transparent pricing where you order it online, it comes to your home, you do it, you send it back, you get your results in this beautiful online platform. If you need to talk to a doctor virtually, you can. And then you can actually take those results into a doctor and say, I had a hard time convincing you to get my thyroid checked out. You didn't think it was that, but I actually did it, and my thyroid hormones are off. And I think we need to, look into this further and do some more tests and perhaps get me on a treatment plan. And so when you look at the testimonials of this company, it's absolutely incredible because it's actually empowered people who are so frustrated by the healthcare system and perhaps even spent thousands or tens of thousands of dollars to try and figure out what's going on to actually get healthy. And preventative health, right, is what saves the healthcare system a lot of money, because as people get sicker and sicker, they're either hospitalized, right, for long periods of time. If you're a diabetic and didn't know it, right, you can have really bad internal organ damage, or even it can lead to diabetic amputations of your legs or feet. And these are huge healthcare expenses. And women and minorities are generally the people that aren't taken seriously and therefore also burdened with these costs.
Are you finding that sourcing has been easier or harder than you expected, given that your thesis is overlooked ideas? Is it easy for you guys to find some of these overlooked?
Yeah, so it's incredibly easy. So that's the part that we've been most amazed by, and it's really wonderful. We've been lucky to have a lot of sort of press coverage around what we do, and so we see about 8,000 deals a year at this point, and it's only increasing. Through our foundation, we have a global pitch competition that we did in 25 cities across 5 continents, and we got almost 2,000 applications just for that. And the requirements are pretty narrow. It's have a female or minority founder, haven't raised $3 million, so pre-seed amount, is a technology scalable venture backable business, and fits sort of, we don't say we're impact investors, but every investment we make, we really do believe has a really systemic impact on whatever area it's looking at. So generally, these companies are making huge impacts, whether it's, a company that's helping identify bed sores of the elderly earlier on so that they don't result in huge infections and sometimes death and very costly treatment, to, for example, redesigning a bra so that it doesn't hurt women, all different types of things. And we had almost 2,000 applications just in about 60 days for that. So deal sourcing is definitely not the problem whatsoever. We're just seeing a tremendous amount of deals. Typically other very established, well-branded venture firms may see 1,000 or 2,000 deals a year. So deal flow is, something we have a strategic advantage of based on the network we've built and sort of the brand we've built over time.
How often are you saying, okay, we know bra design's a problem, here's a bunch of bra design companies that we've found through our 8,000 deals that we've reviewed, versus we had no idea bra design was a problem, but we talked to this company because of these filters, and now we have this problem that we found that is a real thing?
Yeah, a little bit of both, but I would say it sort of edges more on we know what a lot of the problems are because, right, we're millennial women ourselves that, are global citizens and are constantly sort of exploring different ecosystems and understanding the needs. We reach about 100,000 individuals through our SoGal Foundation global communities, so that's just an amazing sort of feedback loop of what are these different problems that different people are experiencing. So my business partner Pocket and I, yes, we have to feel that we identify with the problem, but we're only two people. It's really important, right, that there's way more people that identify with this problem as well. So we really try to look at that as, right, a lens which we look through as well. And then there's, of course, just some areas of interest where we personally, almost like an entrepreneur, go around the world and we're like, this is a big problem. Let's go out and find the 100 companies that are on the bleeding edge of doing something about it. So right now, the death space is something that I'm incredibly interested in and, very far along in diligence and sort of the deal process with a few different companies in the space. Because when you think about it, right, funeral homes, if you've gone to a funeral recently, I think as a millennial and Generation Z, you're like, this is exactly what I do not want.
Yeah.
Right? If something would, knock on wood, right? We don't want anything to happen to anyone. But if something did, you're like, this is not the environment I want my last send-off.
Totally.
To be, right? And things like burial are incredibly expensive. And so there's really interesting trends, like cremation's actually been increasing at an amazingly fast rate. So now about 50% of Americans are being cremated, which is almost double what it was in the past. And cremation's much cheaper. It's about a fourth of the price of a burial with a casket. And so funeral homes really are sort of looking at wow, we just, our revenue is being chopped in half to a quarter. And also we have a product in real estate that, the next generations aren't very excited about.
Totally.
So what does that look like in the future? And there's some interesting things happening. I think there's still so much more space. And just looking at sort of everything that has to happen from the time, whether it's somebody gets sick or somebody, does if they suddenly die, for example, in a tragic accident, think of how many passwords you have for thousands of things and is there somebody who's your friend or family that you really want going through all that? Where does privacy start and privacy end? What actually has to get done in those situations? Who's doing that? Who has the burden of that? How does the grieving process happen for those individuals and how do you make it easier for them so they're not having traumatic experiences for years by having to process your death and do all the after sort of tasks about it to close everything off. And just as an individual too, what do you want, right? We don't talk about it. Death culture in the US, you guys listening can't see the looks that I'm getting right now from Jay and Eric, but everyone's shocked. It's oh my gosh, she's talking about death. This is not something we talk about all the time. And right, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Because eventually we're going to have either grandparents or parents that are going to pass away. We have to think about, ourselves and we're going to be those decision makers and the people who have the responsibility to do this, and the industry just is nowhere near where it needs to be to sort of be beneficial to the millennial or Gen Z consumer.
I've been looking for a long time to talk about death for one, but also pre-death, meaning aging,
Yeah.
How much have you looked at aging technology or anti-aging technology?
Yeah, so I love aging and aging technology. That's
oh my God, this is going to be
area that's really interesting to me. I think, there's a lot of pharmaceuticals that are already on the market that could be repurposed. I think there's a lot of really interesting things in the pipeline, but I think we haven't even really had conversations in society of okay, if we bring some of these technologies to the general public use, what happens?
What happens to the population?
Right, because things right, Social Security go bust really fast when we start adding 10, 20, 30 years onto individuals' lives. And it's not so much just about adding years, but it's also about quality of life, right? Can you be living at 90 years old feeling like a 60-year-old versus living to 110 and feeling like a 110-year-old, right? So it's really thinking about how do you have a longer lifespan of high quality where you're walking and self-sufficient and your memory is there. I think particularly memory and sort of mind capacity is something that we all don't want to think about, right? But it affects an enormous amount of people as they age, and it creates a huge burden on families and friends, and just like a feeling of hopelessness and being lost for the individual themselves. So I think there's a lot of interesting things kind of happening there, but I think we also need to all start having conversations about this, because I have a friend, for example, her mom in her 50s has early onset Alzheimer's and is already in a memory care facility. And that was really a shock to her whole family. And I think these are things that we're just so uncomfortable talking about, that when they happen, we don't even know the preferences of other individuals. And that creates such a burden, right, for like you to have to figure out what to do then. And the emotional toll on that is so big. So like, for example, there's some companies that sort of try and help facilitate conversations around this so that, you know, families, friends, romantic partners can sort of have a baseline understanding. But right, it's not something that's fun to talk about. It's really scary, but also about just like aging, like, okay, if we're going to get married, and like, what would we do if one of us like can't remember each other? Right? And like, what are we going to do in the meantime? What technologies can we use to make sure that doesn't happen? Or there's a less percentage probability of that happening. So I think a lot of these conversations are like, there's little pockets of them starting to happening in the sort of death and aging communities, but it hasn't become really widespread because it's just so emotionally charged.
How do you fund something that people don't want to do?
Yes, that's an interesting question. You have to make it, right, like a better product and experience. And there's this one company that I absolutely love. We're not an investor in it yet, at least. It's called Eterniva, and they create diamonds out of hair and ashes of a loved one. So you would actually, whether you're burying them, you can take hair, or you're cremating them, you can take the ashes. And they have this amazing process where they sort of walk somebody through. It takes, about 6 to 9 months to create one of these diamonds, and then typically the individual will set it in like a beautiful setting, but it actually has completely changed how individuals deal with grief. It becomes from something very sad to something about celebrating life. So there's examples where, a husband passed away from cancer, and him and his wife were motorcycle enthusiasts, and he actually found this before he passed away and said, I think this is something that might be good for you to do, and I'd like you to do this for me, and then I want you, here's the list of all the places I want you to go on the motorcycle while wearing the necklace of me so that I'm with you, and that, we get to go on the adventures we had planned to go on together, but it's just in a different form.
I love that, because
Yeah, I almost cried.
there's such a different feeling of in a traditional funeral, it's like, okay, we're saying goodbye, you're going into the ground, and then we're walking away. And even like cremation, you have this urn, but if you hold the urn, even that's kind of like a strange artifact to have. Whereas if the actual form factor of the remaining is something beautiful that is something that you're proud to wear, that is part of your personal uniform every day.
Yeah, and I think too, one of the biggest trends, right, is millennials and Generation Z, we're not staying anywhere that long. We're moving from city to city, and we also have very different family ties than the past. So the idea of having a family mausoleum or sort of, burial plot where all 50 family members are, that's just not realistic anymore, right? And with sort of how families have evolved as well, right? Divorced, domestic partners, all different things sort of go into that. And then it's also who can even visit you depending on the physical location that you choose? Is that an additional burden and sort of guilt that comes on? Because then it's I only visited them once in the past 3 years because it took me to go to a trip overseas to do this, and I don't have the resources to do it. That makes somebody feel worse rather than better.
It's bizarre to have almost like the hubris to say, I need to take up space when I'm no longer here. We were just talking about some of the difficult questions that need to happen if we're talking about reversing aging.
Right.
If the population of the planet grows, which it's going to do regardless, and we're taking up all this green space,
yeah,
with just caskets, it's just bizarre to me. It's just so
it's
weird.
actually really not environmentally friendly at all. So there are some interesting companies out there. For example, you can get cremated and then your ashes can help create a coral reef underwater and sort of repopulate coral reefs that have been destroyed by different, environmental predators that our human nature has created. There's like a whole really cool like tree area where you can scatter your ashes among a tree that is yours. There's some really interesting eco-friendly ways of burial as well that are emerging. But I would say, right, most people don't even know these exist or how they'd go about them. Or, right, like if something happened to you, nobody would even know that you'd want that because you haven't expressed that to anyone yet because we're not having these conversations.
You talked about eco-friendly. I'm curious if you have thought about or explored the edges of where health tech and almost like green sustainability tech comes in, like you mentioned the damage that we're doing to the planet as a species, whether you believe in a total climate crisis or not, the damage that we're doing to the planet is going to have some effect on our ability to continue to live here. So like, is there a health tech play that meets this kind of green tech?
Yeah, so I think about this every single day, and this is such a huge problem that we should all be on red alarm about, but we're not. So there's various research studies. For example, when you look in the developing world, you would assume that sort of their increase of cancer rates would sort of happen the same way it did in places like America. But when you actually look, as soon as they get like actual mattress beds, they spike up to where sort of American cancer rates are right now, which is sort of telling me once you have, fabrics that are covered in flame retardant, then cancer spikes.
Wow.
So there's things we don't even think about, right? Like your mattress, right? But you're spending 8 hours a day plus on that. You're putting your face down right in it. You're breathing those fumes. And when we have all these autoimmune diseases that people can't really, like multiple sclerosis, nobody can explain why people get multiple sclerosis other than your immune system is overreacting. And then when you think about microplastics, like we're eating about a credit card worth of plastic every day, and plastic is incredibly endocrine disrupting. So you're seeing now like just women, there's something called polycystic ovary syndrome, which is where typically you have a bit more testosterone than normal and cysts form in your ovaries. And this can lead to things like high cholesterol, diabetes rates much higher, as well as infertility. So it used to be about 1 in 100 women had this, then it went to about 1 in 10, and they're saying now it's commonly like it's not diagnosed as much as it should be of the actual occurrence, but it may be about 1 in 4.
Wow.
And this is like an incredibly hormone-driven sort of endocrine and gynecological issue. Something like that is not just, creating infertility, but it's also creating then higher risks of heart issues as well as diabetes when you just think about like the downstream impact of how that's going to have on our healthcare system. It's huge, and I pray to whatever anyone believes in, right, that we figure out some solutions of like what do we do about this microplastic and plastic pollution situation, because these microplastics are being consumed by every single organism in the sea. And that goes up the entire food chain. I don't know if it's too late or not, but I would encourage, I'd love to see entrepreneurs in this space that are tackling this in unique ways. I think, right, as individuals, we can take actions that help, but there really is going to have to be something where it's this scientific, maybe, there's something that helps dissolve these microplastics. Like, plastics don't go away. And even when we think plastics are being recycled, they're not. Like, in many municipalities, less than 10% of plastics that actually arrive there are ever getting recycled. And then I don't know how many of you know about sort of China is no longer accepting our recycling, and we have not built this infrastructure over the past 20 years that's necessary for plastics recycling. So we're basically shipping it now to other developing countries, whether it's Malaysia, Indonesia, and who are we, right, as Americans to say, let's go and pollute other countries, right, because of our own consumption and give them health problems. In places like Malaysia, Indonesia, where they're now seeing the burning of plastics that can't be recycled, cancer rates, upper respiratory disease, everything is just spiking, childhood asthma, right? So this is a problem. We really got to fix it. When we look at the petroleum industry is who really is the producers of plastic. They think plastic production is just only going to increase exponentially over the next couple decades. Like, we really need to figure out how to not make that happen and also clean up the mess that we've already created, because it's so detrimental to health on so many levels.
I want you to either restore my faith in humanity or make it even worse. Do you find that there are entrepreneurs actually working to solve these problems?
Yes.
That's good.
But I'd like more VCs to be courageous to actually fund this.
That's what I was going to ask.
Because it's highly technical. A lot of these are biotech, new material. Perhaps some of them are actually like machinery manufacturing, processing. Like, these are things that take extensive amounts of capital and are highly risky. But if we're not taking big risks, like, we're not going to fix this.
So do you think that venture capitalists should be more courageous in doing this because there is the financial return at the end of the tunnel, or are you just saying we need somehow to find a way that people can deploy capital to solve these problems?
Yeah, so that's kind of like the double-edged sword right now, is right. Oil prices are kind of going a little bit all over the place, and the price of producing new plastic is highly dependent on the price of oil. And so at times when oil is a certain price, new plastic production becomes cheaper than recycling. So, right, when that occurs, unless we're doing some sort of, governmental mandate of, we are not creating new plastics, new plastics will always be created, right? Because it's profit, it's capitalism, that's going to happen whether we like it or not. So there really is a policy aspect to this as well. And it's really a macro environmental problem too. How do we say, okay, well, maybe recycling plastic costs 5 cents more per item, but it's so important that we do this that we're going to find that 5 cents somewhere.
Or should we go to Mars?
That's another option, but I think we shouldn't count on it, right? That's really a high risk.
Totally. I mean, I said that kind of jokingly because I just think that's such a bizarre solution to this, but
If you want to talk about
Or send our trash to Mars, right?
send our trash to Mars is probably better. Because if you want to talk about bias and selectivity, the people who get to go to Mars versus the ones who don't,
Yep.
is going to be quite the debate. Are there any problems that Gen Z is facing that the other generations, especially as you get older up the scale, aren't from a health perspective?
Yeah, so I think when you really look at sort of mental health, this is a really interesting area. So we just made an investment in a stealth company that will be opening in April in New York City around mental health and wellness. But when you look at both millennials and Generation Z, there's higher prevalence of mental health issues than ever before. And, there's multiple things affecting that. One, just being people are more comfortable to talk about these things, which is amazing. And people are more comfortable getting the help they need, which is also amazing. But sort of the old system of mental health really isn't conducive to how millennials and Gen Z operate, as well as what millennials and Gen Z can afford. A $300 therapy session is very inaccessible for the majority, right, of millennial and Gen Z users. So then we're only giving mental health access to either the most wealthy or the most vulnerable through social services, and leaving this huge gap sort of in the middle, and not using technology sort of in ways that can make it more accessible but also more relevant. And I think there's a lot of issues that compound into this. It even goes into education and, student loan debt, the anxiety and stress that individuals have from sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars of student loan debt. That can take decades of your adulthood to either pay off or not pay off and be late on your payments, and just the amount of sort of mental trauma that's happening from that. I think a lot of people are starting to look at education with a serious, glance and be is it worth this, right? Is it worth my time? Is it worth the hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt I may accumulate that will impact me till I'm 50 years old? And how is that going to affect me as a person? Because when you look at sort of financial well-being, that actually goes to health well-being as well as then your access to health care later on. So you also see a lot of people, millennials and Gen Z, who even when they have a problem won't go to a doctor, or like won't go to the emergency room because they're afraid of how much it's going to cost. And like, you know, they're like, I'm already behind my credit cards, my student loans. I can't afford my high deductible plan that's a $15,000 deductible getting a $15,000 bill because I broke my wrist.
How susceptible are your investments to changing political trends with healthcare policies?
Yeah, so this is something I think about a lot, and it was something I thought about even more when sort of the Affordable Health Care Act first came out and Trump was really, you know, going at it as well. So in health tech in particular, there's a couple things that are really important, that it's like reimbursable by someone, and that it's revenue generating for the person who's sort of in the middle of this, whether it's the doctor or the hospital, right? Like a software for a hospital, like it has to increase productivity or lower cost or create more revenue or be reimbursable, right? And if it doesn't do those things, even if it's the most wonderful technology that saves lives, it doesn't matter. Every health tech startup that doesn't do that will fail. And that's just because of the way our American healthcare system works right now. So the best companies I've seen in this space really understand on a very intricate level, like how do health insurance providers interact with either doctors or hospital systems, and how does that interact with then the end consumer? And who pays for what? Who has the ability to pay for what, right? Like, does a doctor want to spend $3,000 on a piece of software that's not going to generate them any revenue? Probably not, right? So really looking at how these things work within current reimbursable and revenue streams is really important. I tend to stay away from things that are just like really policy plays. Like there's a lot of health tech that's like, okay, this policy is going into place, we can take advantage of it, we're going to be, you know, the provider for this. I think that's a risky bet. I prefer to focus on things that are like very large health problems, that there's lots of people that are incentivized to pay for this on various sort of layers, so that, let's say regulation does change, that, you know, you can shift your business model accordingly.
We talked about a lot of heavy stuff here. I'd love to end on just some of your most optimistic outlooks on certain problems or technologies that you spend some time thinking about.
Yeah, so I'm really optimistic that as we get better at being inclusive in ecosystems, whether it's right geography, like your podcast focuses on gender, race, socioeconomic status, we actually are starting to include the rest of the economy. And so for me, I've always found it very silly that like we talk about GDP growth, like 3-4%, but we're still excluding huge percentages of our population in having fair and equal opportunities in either the workforce or technology space. So I'm really excited that as these become more equal, there's actually huge economic opportunity as well as individual opportunity for us to thrive, for us to solve problems, but also just to become more prosperous as an economy and society.
That's awesome. Well, if people want to learn more about you or the work you do at SoGal Ventures after the show, where should they go?
Yes, SoGalVentures.com. We also have Twitter at SoGal Ventures. We have tons of Facebook groups for our SoGal chapters across 50 cities. If you're interested in learning if there's a SoGal chapter in your city, go to imsogal.com. If there's not, you can actually apply, and we have lots of financial resources to create a SoGal ecosystem within your city, so you can build your own network of amazing individuals on both the entrepreneur and investor side that will help you achieve your goals and help your community grow.
Hey listener, have you ever wanted to get a message in front of the Upside audience but weren't sure how to sponsor this show or weren't able to do a long-term sponsorship? Well, now you can just go to upside.fm/classifieds and let our audience know anything that's going on in your world, whether it's an event, an application, a special coupon or deal, or just letting them know who you are, what your company does. All you have to do is go to upside.fm/classifieds and you can place an ad on this show. That's upside.fm/classifieds.
All right, Jay, we just spoke with Elizabeth from SoGal. Holy smokes, we are dumb.
Yeah, Elizabeth is very, very smart. That was a very fun conversation. She came in, and before we even got on the mics, you could tell just in the questions she was asking us, she was trying to hyper direct where we spend our time talking And it's clear that she did that because she has so much she can talk about at a level of depth. And I could have done 30 more minutes, 60 more minutes, several hours more of conversation on this one.
Earlier this week, you told the Trailblazers group that my knowledge base was extremely broad and only a little bit deeper than a puddle.
That's not what I said.
Yeah, but it's what you meant.
No, it's not. I said that Eric is one of those guys who knows, how did I describe it?
What you actually said was he knows just a little bit more than you do about every topic,
Yes, that's it.
but not too much more.
Which is a compliment, actually.
I think that's the definition of like a know-it-all.
No, it's not. It's a know it more than you.
Regardless, if a puddle is my analogy, Elizabeth was the Pacific Ocean because I felt like she could keep on going on any of those topics.
Totally. And you and I have been trying to get into the space, and by you and I mean I have been trying to get into the space of aging and reverse aging and death, and that came up unprompted. I got real excited, reeled it back a little bit, didn't want to spend too much time on there, but what I really liked about this was everything we talked about, all those subject areas, all the areas that she's putting her time and investment dollars into matter. You know what I mean? There are some venture firms who are purely out to return the fund for their LPs, which makes sense. It's in their charter. But you see some of these investments and some of these companies that are doing well, and so many of them don't have true positive impact on quality of life or wellness or impacting communities in such a positive way. And the way that Elizabeth put it, she wanted to see more venture capitalists be more courageous in the things that they are backing. I love that as an ethos. And I understand why some LPs may not want to back that because they're just looking to get exceptional returns on their money. But man, it's reaffirming and optimistic for me to see people like Elizabeth in the world trying to do both.
Yeah, I think that this is something I see kind of discussed on online forums a lot is VC is supposed to be swinging for the fences. That's the ethos of the investment class. And as we've gotten more and more people into VC, it feels like there's more and more people who are just investing in the next app, the next productivity hack, the next thing that's going to make some money and has a good playbook for making that work, but maybe isn't the thing that is going to be impacting 1 billion people.
And yet, the actual results that Elizabeth was sharing with us for her portfolio compared to industry portfolio averages are way ahead of the curve. And yet, she had a hard time closing this original fund. And yet, she's getting 8,000 deals a year that she's seeing. I hear things like this, and it just doesn't make sense. It's unfortunate. I don't know if it's the system that we've built, but I'm excited for her team to grow and expand because it's clear that, some of these founders who are facing their own struggles of getting people to buy in and believe in what they're doing come to Elizabeth. She sees it, and they very quickly have success to the point where, like she said, some of her investments have raised additional rounds while she was raising the fund, took some money off the table, and invested in her fund themselves. Like, what more of a positive indication could that be for a fund if you're looking for somebody to back?
Well, this was a fun one, Jay, and I look forward to staying in touch with Elizabeth, watching SoGal grow, and just seeing the impact that they have on the venture capital space. So, listeners, if you are interested in health tech, aging, death tech, wow, that's a...
Death tech is heavy.
Yeah, that's like the name of a club in Berlin. Send us a tweet at UpsideFM or reach out to us at hello@upside.fm, and we will talk to you next week. Death tech.
That's all for this week. Thanks for listening. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's guest, so shoot us an email at hello@upside.fm or find us on Twitter at UpsideFM. We'll be back here next week at the same time talking to another founder in our quest to find upside outside of Silicon Valley. If you or someone you know would make a good guest for our show, please email us or find us on Twitter and let us know. And if you love our show, please leave us a review on iTunes. That goes a long way in helping us spread the word and continue to help bring high-quality guests to the show. Eric and I decided there were a couple things we wanted to share with you at the end of the podcast, and so here we go. Eric Hornung and Jay Klaus are the founding parties of the Upside podcast. At the time of this recording, we do not own equity or other financial interest in the companies which appear on this show. All opinions expressed by podcast participants are solely their own opinion and do not reflect the opinions of Duff & Phelps LLC and its affiliates, Unreal Collective LLC and its affiliates, or any entity which employ us. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. We have not considered your specific financial situation nor provided any investment advice on this show. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.
Never mind, bro, that can't be matched. I'm lighting it on fire, used to run victory laps, and still I'm not even tired. It's all about the timing, yeah, that's what they say. Well, I'ma keep on rhyming, find a way and get it.